right, well, today we're going to talk about things we should talk about in church. Now, I had a completely different opening for how this... Okay, this isn't going to happen. Sit down. You can sit down with Daddy right here. I had a completely different opening for how this sermon was going to go today, but the Father has given us a real-life example. In most churches, when the pastor is standing on the church, you don't have very, very needy children. They're very, very needy children who must sit next to them and fight a little bit about who's supposed to hug who and who's supposed to do what. You know, a couple minutes ago, he needed all the attention, and now all of a sudden he didn't want her to touch him. He tells her to shush. Dude, that's hypocrisy. I just saw you when you were in the middle of the blessing of kids. So I'm going to attempt to do this with them up here. And maybe this will make it a little bit more entertaining because they're definitely cuter than I am. So today we're going to talk about things we should talk about in the church. See, I like to try to keep the titles as short as possible. And so I couldn't put church/congregation/synagogue/fellowship/home study/ I don't even know what else is new at this point in time. But it applies across the board. And the reason why it applies across the board is because every church kind of has the thing that they do. We have the thing we do. I mean, you know, Carlos is constantly looking at me like, why can't I do this? And it's like, because we have the thing we do. And every church has that. And that's what kind of makes every church unique. We're witnessing that in our community right now. Journey Church, one of the largest non-denominational churches right across the interstate, had the thing that they did. It was their thing, very popular. Sit down. Sit down. If I tell you again, I'm going to spank you in front of everybody. And then we'll talk about other things in church we should talk about. I like getting tested. This is the best ministry you have. But Journey Church, their pastor came back. He was burnt out, didn't want to do it anymore. And all of a sudden, here comes Fellowship Church. Some of you who've visited the Dallas area, you know about Fellowship Church. They're the people who own like 45,000 acres on the North Grapevine area. It looks like a mall when you drive by there on Sunday. Last week when I was driving back with my family from IKEA on Sunday morning, we happened to drive by Fellowship. Fellowship is huge, very huge. And now they have a campus here as well. They have a thing that they do. This church is now going to become Fellowship. They're going to do the thing that they do. Every church does. In the Messianic, and that's where I really want to talk today, because I don't want to really throw stones at the Christian church. I don't want to throw stones at Judaism. I want us to talk about ourselves. And so by talking about ourselves, and I guess we're Messianic, whatever you want to call us, Christian, Messianic, Hebrew roots, Hebraic roots, we're everything under, Torah pursuant believers in Yeshua, we're about everything under the sun, depends upon who you ask. And that's part of the beauty of it. Part of the beauty of it is that we're all individuals. And being individuals strengthens us as a community. It's no different than the Israelites when the Israelites were in the wilderness. Not different at all. Because each one of the tribes had a little bit of a unique element to themselves. And as a whole, they were strengthened as a community. See, Messianic congregations, Hebrew roots congregations, Hebraic roots, Messianic Judaism, whatever you want to call them, they have a problem of doing the same exact thing over and over again. Once again, I already admitted to you publicly that I do the same thing to Carlos. So once again, I'm guilty of the same thing. And that is that for years and years and years, we've gotten into a routine where we read predetermined cycles every week. Now, I don't think there's anything wrong with the Torah. Not one thing wrong with the Torah. I believe the Torah is a blessed book. I keep the Torah to the best of my ability, which some days is better than others, honestly. Pretty easy for me at this point in time, 10 years in, to not eat shellfish. Pretty easy for me to not order lobster, 10 years in. However, to honor thy father and thy mother, yeah, that's one I'm still working on. To not be angry and want to steal or thieve or any of the other things in your mind when your children don't behave and you've got to keep yourself composed. It's not easy. Those types of things the Lord puts in front of us to test us. But why not in our congregation? I'm going to have a conversation one-on-one with God tonight. I try to do it every night. And I'm going to thank Him for this real live, in the flesh example this year. This is on top of anything He's ever done for me before. It really is. If you don't believe God has a sense of humor, just keep watching. But why aren't we talking about the elements of life that we experience on an everyday? We do, and now look, I get it. I totally understand, and I'm not going to tell a lot of you anything new. We understand the fact that most of our parents and us grew up in a Christian church. And then we came to the Torah and to the feast. And when we came to the Torah and the feast, we did a vroom. And now the most important thing to us was Torah cycle readings every single Shabbat. We had to do the same midrashing. We had to do all these types of things. And in doing so, we got to a point where we were doing exactly the same thing every single week. The problem is none of us are exactly the same every single week. We're just not. We're human beings. And one week, God puts a trial and a test in front of us, and He puts a huge win in front of us. And in other weeks, we smooth pretty easily. So why every week are we focusing on just that? And I say just that because some of Gage's verbiage and some of my verbiage might be misconstrued, especially for people who don't know us well. You may think that we're speaking against the Torah. We are not speaking against the Torah. We are putting the Torah back in the rightful place, which is the law, and Yeshua back in the rightful place, which is the law giver. The law giver. Now, I want to take a second because this has been sitting in the back of my mind, and I wanted to say this originally when I came up here because this is pretty awe-inspiring for me. And Daniel, I think he would second this if he knows that this has happened. I went back there. Normally, I check on the live stream just to make sure what comments are there. Every once in a while, we get a very interesting comment from somebody who doesn't believe the same way that we do on a Shabbat, and it becomes a source of contention. And there's a whole other service going on online than there is going on in here. So every Shabbat after worship, I go back and I check there. This week, there was a gentleman who said Shabbat Shalom from Kenya. He's watching from Kenya. Now, 2.5 years ago, when we started HFF and the Lord had given us that vision, we knew the Lord had given us a vision to be different. We're still Israelites. We're still Messianics. We're still Hebrews. We're still Christians. We're still whatever label you want. But we wanted to be a little bit different. We wanted to minister to people who are in a different place in their walk and do so through the gifts that God had given us. And we didn't know what that was going to be like. I mean, anytime you start throwing LED lights on and stuff like that, and you start using words like church, you alienate a whole percentage of people who consider themselves to be Messianic. It's true. I'm not trying to make a joke. It's absolutely true. If you don't know that, that is true. But we felt like the Lord specifically had called us to focus on this type of a calling. And we've done so. And to find out that the Lord would see fit to allow us to join for the Sabbath day with someone in Kenya is overwhelmingly humbling. One day, it won't just be Kenya. One day it will be all of our brothers and sisters from all over the world who will be regathered into the kingdom of the Lord, and Mashiach will be back. And then we'll be keeping Shabbat with all our brothers and sisters. But it is unbelievably humbling to go on there and see a gentleman's name and him to say, Shabbat Shalom, I'm watching from Kenya. So Shabbat Shalom to you from Norman, Oklahoma. We are brothers of the same master, of Yeshua HaMashiach. Shabbat Shalom, brother. So we have gotten ourselves into a cycle that says we must read the same things, talk about the same things, do the same things every single week. Churches do the same thing. We'll play the same 5 songs. We'll do this. There's got to be a message on grace or love. You can only go 10 minutes. Daniel kind of looked at me and said, there's no way you're doing a message in 10 minutes. I'm not doing a message in 10 minutes. Anybody who thinks of that has already set themselves up for failure. We wanted to be different. And in order to be different, you must sometimes do the things that are hard. You must sometimes say the things that make people uncomfortable. Why? Because ultimately, if we're ever going to continue to grow towards the refining process of Messiah, we have to be willing to look at the things that we don't want to look at. Honestly, that's the season we're in. The season we're in is in the season of Elul. And everybody struggles with different things. Some people struggle to come to Shabbat service. Shots fired. But it's true. And so I thank you guys today who have come because you answered the call. And it's time for us to all get real about what's going on in our homes, what's in our life, in our relationship with Messiah. It's time for us to really look at what our calling is. Because I've taught before that you don't need a pulpit in order to be able to start a revolution. The calling doesn't come so that you can stand behind a pulpit or a nice wood table. The calling has been on your life from the day you were born. The question is going to be whether or not you answer it and what you do with it. But you're not going to do anything with that calling if you continue to sit back and wait and say that it's got to happen this way, this way, this way. So it's time for us to get real in our lives. You see, every one of us struggles with some element of sin. Everyone does. They do. Sometimes it's anger. Sometimes it's lust. Sometimes it's greed. Sometimes it's thievery. Sometimes it's adultery. Sometimes it's whatever. Alcoholism, abuse, addiction. Some of us struggle with things that other people, it's not even a struggle for them. You know, I've found that in my life that the areas that I struggle in are not the traditional male struggles of people. Just they aren't. I'm unique in that sense, but I'm not in others. Because I struggle with things that the overwhelming percentage of males don't struggle with. But how about all of us when we start talking about things we struggle with, kind of like when we bring up the word enemies? You see, enemies is one of those things that we do that we try to act like we don't do. Because a lot of times you don't walk up to somebody like, oh man, I see that person over there. They're my enemy. And nobody talks that way anymore. Nobody talks that way. But when you walk up and you talk about somebody and you've now alienated them to be an opposition to yourself and your thought process, and you now try to change how somebody approaches how they interact with that person, you basically have created them an enemy. So you don't have to walk up and use this type of verbiage. We just do it naturally. It's like, oh, so-and-so didn't like something I said one time, or so-and-so didn't like how I wore my hair, or I wasn't modest enough in my attire, and you really should stay away from them. They're modesty police. And by the way, I've seen how they dress sometimes. You've created an enemy. And you've then tried to bring people over to your side and created an enemy with them against them. See, that's a problem. The reason why it's a problem, not just in the sense that it means that you got way too much time on your hands and you're not looking at yourself from a self-reflective standpoint. It's a problem because the moment that you created them an enemy, whether it's subliminally or you know what you're doing, you have a higher responsibility on how you're to treat them. You're supposed to love your enemy as yourself. That's what the scripture says. How many of you are walking around in Oneg afterwards telling people, oh, I'm the modesty police. Oh, you should see how I dress when I'm not around here. But don't tell anybody. You're not doing the same type of gossip and trying to create an enemy of yourself to anybody else. No, it's always aimed at somebody else. So we need to start looking at how we treat one another. Because subliminally, the moment somebody else hears these things, sees these things, the moment you try to create an enemy out of somebody with somebody else, it doesn't go away whether you like it or not. It's there. It's there. We don't even have the ability to understand half of what the brain can do. But I can tell you this, it doesn't forget. We all know it doesn't forget. Forgiveness isn't the only struggle that we have. Forgetting is. Why are we talking about that on Shabbat? How many of you know congregations that get together and they're midrashing on anxiety and depression? I don't know of any. I've traveled to a lot. I don't know of any. Anybody know of anyone that sits around on Shabbat and midrashes on anxiety? Okay, I don't either. But yet anxiety is one of the most detrimental disorders of our modern day culture. We're all anxious. Some of you are anxious for me to shut up. We're all anxious. Our culture has created it that way. We can't even drive through the drive-through window at McDonald's now. Excuse me, Sonic is a little drive-through, a little bit non-GMO. We can't even go through the drive-through now and wait for 2 minutes to get our food. That's how anxious. Everything is so fast. We can't turn our phones off. We can't turn anything off. Anxiety is crippling. But normally when we think of anxiety disorders, we think of people who are on medicine. And they're there and they're just like, they're zombies because they're so heavily sedated. No, every one of us struggles with anxiety at some point in time. At least once in the week, I guarantee you that something makes you anxious. Something makes you anxious. And it adjusts how you approach things. But why are we not in this place and in other congregations sitting and talking about those types of things that cause us problems? What about the women who just have kids? Who struggle with the anxiety of the fact that, oh, my life has changed. Or I have another child. Or anything. I think if you sat down and asked every woman in here who has had babies, the moment you had a baby or multiple babies, you get anxiety when you think about how things are going to change in your life and how you may not necessarily have it all put together like you did before. And if you didn't have it put together before, you're even more anxious because now you got another one. You're like, man, I couldn't figure it out with one. How am I going to do it with two? And then somebody told me if I have three, it's even worse. By the way, it is worse when you have three. After three, you can have as many as you want, and it really doesn't change. But that third one, That's because you had one like you when you were older. Thank you, God. Honestly, though, why are we talking about that? Why are we talking about those types of things? Why, when you come together on Shabbat, are we not looking at what Yeshua had to say? I mean, Yeshua cleansed the lepers. Yeshua healed the woman. Yeshua was put in all kinds of situations in order for him to give us clarity on the rules of the Torah and the spirit by which the Torah was given. But why are we not talking about those things? No, we're midrashing whether or not it was Abraham or how far did Abraham get up there before he was going to kill his son. And what was this and what was that? Oh, let me tell you about the sod level. When I was reading the first scroll that I saw in Savannah, Georgia in 1862 is when it was published. And meanwhile, somebody's over there with anxiety going, will you get done with this teaching? I don't care. We got people walking around and they say that they believe all these things, and in 3 to 4 years we find them they completely left the faith because they never really did care. They had problems when they came to us. They had problems when they came to our small groups. They had problems when they came to Shabbat, and they wanted an escape and a reprieve. They came to this place to find somebody to help them heal. And for some reason, and all the time it takes us in the morning to put our clothes on, do our hair, whatever, come to Shabbat, we've created an environment as a whole, there are exceptions, as a whole, that created a place where people feel like you must be perfect to walk through the door. The church has done this too. All of us have done this in one way or another. This is where you put your Sunday best on, you come in and you put your smiles on and everybody sees you. And if somebody's in the corner crying, praying like, oh, what's wrong with her? Oh, man, she messed up. Yeah, she's messed up. And she came to the place she's supposed to come to get healed. Hate to break it to you, I'm messed up too. I'm probably more messed up than all of you. I said to somebody today, Daniel doesn't need a mic to be able to be heard, and thank you for proving me right, Daniel. Anxiety is crippling. Yet Matthew 6:25 through 26 and 31 through 33 tells us that we are not to be anxious for nothing. With our enemies, Matthew 5:43 through 47, we talked about it, sets a pretty high bar when you consider somebody to be an enemy. Bigotry. Here's one that doesn't get talked about a lot now. Bigotry. Kids these days, they moved on with their slang and their whatever. I don't hear anybody walking like, you a bigot. Like, no. Like, I don't even know what they say. I'm too old now to even know what they say. I absolutely forgot it. It's the gray hair. But bigot. The Bible clearly outlines that if we confess with our mouth that Yeshua is Lord and believe in our heart that God has raised him from the dead, that you have obtained salvation. Hate to break it to you, God doesn't really care what you want, and it never really was about you. It was about him, his name, his namesake, and his kingdom. So we can say all we want that, salvation means this, and then you must do this, and we must be able to judge it by this. And we have all those standards. Every single one of us have created the standards, and then we are intolerant of another individual who may have a different viewpoint on that. At some point in time, each one of us has done that. Some of us are a little bit more confrontational, i.e. me. Some people are a little bit less confrontational, i.e. Ephraim. Some people like myself will come and tell you that I'm intolerant of your viewpoint. Some people like Ephraim will come and tell me that he's intolerant of your viewpoint. And so, but either way, we become intolerant about another person's viewpoint on something that was wrote in a completely different culture we don't understand, with a lot of people a lot smarter than us who have studied it, who live in that over a period of time. And so why do we have anything to become bigots on? Like the calendar, the Zeet seats. We have become intolerant of other people's perspectives. That's why we don't have a perspective here. Never once have we come out and said, this is a calendar we're going to take. Never once have we come out and said, this is a stance on Zeet seats. Because the moment we do, somebody is going to be intolerant of the decision that was made. Since I'm not your judge and I'm not your jury, I'm going to continue to teach you the best way I know and let the Lord continue to work on you. Because nowhere in the Bible does I say, by the way, when you came and you heard Chris was able to provide your salvation for you. Chris was able to give you, it never was Chris. It wasn't, no, God gave you an anointing of the word. The Ruach was able to move inside you. It wasn't Chris, never was Chris. It wasn't Daniel, it wasn't Ephraim. It wasn't any of us. It was God. We just have to get out of the way for God. Hard to get out of the way when we study all week long on every single thing that's written in the Torah portion or the half-Torah portion or the Brit portion. And we go and we sit in a room with people and we spend hours and hours and hours fighting over that. Some people love that, and that's okay. And I believe there's a time and a place for us to midrash. But why aren't we talking about things that can actually change our lives? Why aren't we talking about things in the place with our brothers and sisters that can actually make us better people, can make us better disciples? They were fishermen. He made them better men. I guarantee you every single one of those disciples is a better man than I am. I want to be a better man. So why aren't we talking about those things? Why aren't we talking about our struggles? We do in private text messages, or we talk about it with our mom or our dad or that one close friend. But why don't we feel comfortable to come into a service on Shabbat and be open and honest with people about where we're at? Why do we believe that by doing so, we're going to be set in front of Yeshua with the rest of the Pharisees saying, this woman is an adulteress? And then why don't we trust Yeshua, who then turns the tables on the Pharisees and says, who wants to throw the first stone? They got out of Dodge quicker than the Roadrunner. Because they were all guilty. Just my opinion. I'll quote it on that. I don't have any real information on it. I think one of them in that group probably had something to do with that woman. And I think Yeshua knew it. And I think they knew that Yeshua knew it. So Yeshua got real with them real quick. And they got really lost real quick. What about selfishness? Luke 9:23-25 tells us that we must deny ourselves daily to take up our cross, our burdens, and follow Yeshua. Because if we will lose our life for the sake of Yeshua, we will actually save our life. Now, we know that some people will take this too far. Some people will go looking for opportunities to lose their life so that they can prove that they love Jesus. I don't even want to go that far right now. I want us to baby step into some stuff here. Because I honestly believe that might be off the reservation a little bit. That might be some New Mexico stuff, like Fox News New Mexico stuff, like over there. So let's just talk Norman, Oklahoma right now. Marriage splittings, friendship splittings. We got people who got daddy issues, mommy issues. Americans are some of the most selfish and entitled human beings on the face of the earth. Even down to our religious belief. We walk around thinking that we know more than the Jews who have studied in Israel for hundreds and hundreds of years. We walk around thinking we know more than people who are in Europe. Because, hey man, I've had some European food. There's a Euro place down on Campus Corner. You know, you guys from Greece, you don't know nothing about no Euros. It's gyros. You got to say it with a little southern twang. Americans, we have become selfish. Everything is about us. Even the Bible we're trying to make about us now. We're trying to make the Bible about the United States of America. The Bible's about the land of Israel. Always has been. Always has been. But if you got friends whose marriages are splitting, if you got people who got struggles in their relationships, if you got people who can't keep their jobs because they're constantly fighting, if you got all these issues that are happening because people are more worried about themselves and getting theirs than taking care of somebody else, then no wonder we got problems. And we got it in the church. We got people fighting over what the worship music should sound like, how the pastor should do their hair, what happens. And this happens at every church, every place. Monty's called them the worship wars for years and years and years. Happened back in the day when they first brought an organ in, when it was all a cappella. Then I am unbelievably happy that there was not another world war over the fact that they brought a drum set into a church. It was more tense than Donald Trump and Kim Jong-un's nuclear treaty. Seriously, they're trying to bring a drum set into a church and everybody's like, oh, the world's coming to an end. Satan is here. Why? Because we're selfish, because we like the things we want. Does it matter? No, it doesn't matter. These types of things don't matter. In your home and in your heart, you get to have the relationship you want to do. You get to do the things you want. But when we come together as a collective body, we should be interested in the collective body. Not what I want. Not what you want. The vision of HFF that started wasn't Chris Franke's vision. It was a collective team of elders' vision. And we have executed that. So when people come and say, hey, we really want to do this. And we say, we're not really comfortable with that right now. We're not shutting you down because of you. We're shutting you down because the Lord has given us a collective vision. We got to go pray on that. Ain't nobody making the decisions here but the Lord. And when we decide to step in and make a decision on ourselves and get selfish as a leadership, He has a quick way of taking care of that problem. But why aren't we talking about these things in the church? Why aren't we talking about the fact that we're all selfish? That some of us want the service to end after an hour because we're hungry. Some of us don't want Oneg because we want to go home. Why aren't we talking about those things? Instead, what we have is we have people who go out, buy a domain name, and build a little studio, put themselves on a website. They start talking about the same things people have been talking about for 20 years in the Torah portions and all the two-house teachings and all the Messianic Judaism. And nobody is getting together to talk about the fact that we're all broken people. See, Yeshua didn't have a problem with the synagogue. Yeshua went into the synagogue. There's numerous applications where Yeshua, even as a young boy, would go speak in the synagogue. So Saturday time for that. But the overwhelming percentage of congregations and gatherings that call themselves Saturday keeping, Sabbath keeping, don't focus on it at all. They don't even talk about it. It doesn't even exist. So explain to me why Yeshua then went on the road constantly and the word came. Because people were getting healed. Because lives were changing. Not because Yeshua could recite the Torah portion better than Rabbi so-and-so of so-and-so precinct. He was doing things with the Word of God. He was walking them out. It's time for us to stop opening up every ministry under the sun who can regurgitate the same thing that Rico Cortez or Monty Judah did for the last 15 to 20 years. Those men are our elders. We should allow them to be there and we should learn from them, but we should also figure out what our calling is and we should start executing it. And we should start talking about those things. Because there's an awful lot of teachers. There's not a lot of pastors. One of the greatest pieces of respect I ever gained for Monty Judah when I moved here is when he said, I'm really not, I don't have the same shepherd's heart to kind of minister to the people with some of the pastoral elements. That's not my gifting. This is my gifting. It's like, how wise is that of a man to stand up and say that, hey, this really isn't where I feel like the Lord has given me the gift, so I really shouldn't act like he did here. I'm going to go do this over here, and I'm going to do the best of my ability over here. No, we're trying to be everything to everybody. And that leads me to another one. And I'm never going to get through all the ones I want to get through today. It's just not going to happen. I haven't even heard the siren, but I'm pretty sure I'm over. Trust. We can't trust. We don't trust our neighbor. We lock our door. I don't even trust my kids. I just don't. You wouldn't believe how many granola bars disappear that nobody knows where they went. But we also apply that lack of trust to the Lord. When God says he is something, we don't trust it. Let me prove why God is more than that, or God is what I think it is. Or when God says he's going to do something for someone, we don't trust him. When he says he's going to take care of you, we don't really trust him. We keep praying, God, I don't know if you got the first voicemail. God, I don't know if you got my text. I'm still waiting on that better job. God, I'm still waiting on that pretty girl. God, I'm still whatever. He heard you the first time. He's waiting for you to trust him. He doesn't need you to remind him. Last time I checked, the only time he forgets is when he decides to throw something to the east and to the west. So we don't trust. We don't even trust God nowadays. What about tithing and finance? I'll stop right there. I won't even get into that. I won't even get into tithing today, or financial giving, or sharing, because I really don't want to make that. I'm already uncomfortable. No pastor likes to talk about tithing. They just don't. It's time for us to get real inside our congregations and our community about where we actually are. Because I have seen people who have professed to be Messianic, Sabbath-keeping, Yeshua-loving for 5 years or so. Walk into a conference, and when we have an altar call or a prayer time and they come down and we talk to them, confess that they've been lying the whole entire time, that they want to ask Yeshua into their heart for the first time ever. So you can keep the Sabbath, you can keep everything on the outside, you can look like a really good Jew, a really good Hebrew, but if it isn't in here, it's all fake. I know some really smart people who can tell me an awful lot about the Torah portion, who I am pretty sure have no relationship with the Lord. And what's even scarier is a lot of the people who talk and sit into the gatherings and stuff like that, they're the older generation. You got kids. You got grandkids. You had the church. You had the teachings of Yeshua. You had the teaching of the baptism by the Holy Spirit. You had the baptism by the water teachings. You grew up in those things. Most of your kids and most of the grandkids at this point in time, they don't have that because they've been raised in a Sabbath-keeping fellowship where that's put an emphasis on Torah and Torah portions without balancing it and how it comes right back to Messiah. Now, I'm a pastor and I'm guilty of it just as much as everybody else is. But those kids grow up and we forget the fact that they never sat in a church, never heard fire and brimstone, never heard about Jesus, heaven and hell, never heard about those things on a regular basis, and then we wonder why they completely go agnostic, or they go completely to Judaism, or they go completely into an area where they don't believe Messiah has any merit. We did it to them. Subconsciously, we did it to them. We didn't have any intent to do it to them, but we did do it to them. It's the same things our educational system is doing by taking certain things out of the education and not teaching it because it no longer is relevant to them. There's going to come a time here in the future where it's going to be relevant to them, and we just totally screwed them up because we didn't teach it to them. Oh, it's not relevant. Oh, if we understand the Torah, we should understand Messiah. Tell Judaism that. They understand Mashiach. They don't think it's Yeshua. So maybe rather than us trying to worry about being Jews for Jesus or going and getting the Jews or going and getting, maybe we should deal with ourselves who are already here. And we're already here. God already came and got us. He already used somebody to come and get us. He brought us into a place, and we're supposed to come in every Shabbat and join together. We should be like a hospital. A church should be like a hospital that is full of human beings. All of them get sick. Some of them have been trained to help overcome those sicknesses. Yet when the doctors get sick themselves, where do they go? To the same hospital for treatment. This is the model the church should be. Human beings serving one another, trying to get healed. Instead, we have created a place where imperfect people learn how to heal. And instead, we create a place where imperfect people believe they're perfect. We missed the mark of the fact that Yeshua came not to condemn, but to heal. He came to save. He came to complete the cycle. He didn't do away with anything. Just like Gage said today, he made it harder. I can look at a checklist of do's and don'ts, and I can do pretty well with keeping those. But the intent by which I keep them, that's harder to do. Because I can smile at you while I'm cursing you in my head. Public school will teach you how to do that. I know, I'm taking shots. I'm sorry. I just do. It's not even intentional. It'll teach you how to do those things. Yeshua is trying to teach us how not to do those things. He's trying to teach us that you're supposed to smile at that person and not take a shot at him in your head, because it's basically the same thing. It's time for us to start talking about these types of things when we get together with people. It's time for us to start being honest with one another about where we're at. It's time for us to start taking the church back to where the church should have been, which is a place where Yeshua was healing people and working miracles and wonders. And that's not going to happen until we get to a place where we can actually stand up and look at one another and say, I'm not perfect. People wonder why I act the way I do in a pastoral position. I get asked that all the time. Why are you so blunt? Why you don't have a filter? Oh, you should have not said that. Why? If I thought it, it's exactly the same thing in the eyes of Yeshua. So I might as well speak it out of my mouth, and at least you can be mad at me and we can have a conversation about it rather than me harboring it and thinking I got away with it. Daniel admitted, I've known Daniel for a long time. Am I exactly the same way I was the first time you met me? Exactly the same way. Why? Because the thoughts come in, and anybody who's being honest with you, they come in. Even Stephen, who's like the nicest person I've ever met, I've seen him get to a point where he's like, you're drinking non-GMO, blah, 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 blah. Really? And at that brief moment, one of the nicest men I've ever met, soft-spoken, humble, kind, all the things I wish I could be. All the things he exudes, I struggle with. That's why God has you in a place like this. So you can walk hand in hand with brothers. Why? Because we have forgotten that we're stronger together. Oh, well, home fellowship will go off and do our own thing over here. We don't need anybody. Yeah. Satan went out into the wilderness with the Lord too, tried to pick him off and say, hey, why don't you come over here? Why? Because there was no other influence that was there. Israel's all about being a community. When it talks about Israel being holy, it's when they came together on the Sabbath as a community. It's all about a community. It's not about an individual person. The more you try to go out and the more you try to get on your own, the more you'll be picked off. Don't forget that we're stronger together. Don't forget that you have been bought by a price. Don't forget that you were never too far gone, and that's why you're here. It's time for us to start talking about the things that make us uncomfortable in church. Because then and only then are we going to get to a place that we're going to get better. And we're going to get to a place where we look more like Yeshua. And we're going to get to a place that we're more refined. Because if you honestly think it's going to happen in the world, how's that worked out for you? I know it hasn't worked because I've tried it there too. This is a place where we must start talking about the things that actually affect the people that are here and how Yeshua has informed us to go about overcoming those things.